Thank you very much. It is really an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me to speak about a subject that's very close to my heart. I think all of us who work in rural communities have our hearts in it, right? So I work for a private nonprofit corporation that we work in the 13 western states in the United States, including from New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, all the way to Hawaii and Alaska are part of our region. So, and in our, what we do at our RCAC, the Rural Community Assistance Corporation, is community building. We have 4 divisions and different teams. One team that is dedicated to economic development. That's where I work. Another team that's dedicated to infrastructure development, water, sewer, solid waste, that type of assistance. Another team that's dedicated to housing, just all the housing needs. And then we are also a community development financial organization that provides lending. So there is another team that also does the lending. So that's how we are divided. But today I wanted to talk to you about what we called our Building Rural Economies program, which is the newest actually for our RCAC. It started with the housing. It was a housing need in rural communities, and then with the housing came the infrastructure, right? It's like there is a need for the infrastructure, and then after infrastructure came, we have to provide lending for bridge loans, basically. Before you get the big capital monies, you need some startup money, and that's how we started. And then it was the whole idea of, if we're building houses and we're doing the infrastructure and all that, we also have to sustain the rural economies. And that's how our program was created with some funding from our board of directors. They put $150,000 into this program, and for 3 years, and said, show us that you can do it. Or else we are going to cut it off. So we were like, no, you're not cutting it off. We need it. We need to do this. So I'm going to show you some examples of how we had to be strategic about, proving that this was needed and how it was going to work in rural areas. So the first thing we did to build this program was to look at tools that are available for building a rural economy. And so we went around with some other, as a team, with other organizations to look for tools. And one of the tools we found is something called WealthWorks. And WealthWorks have been around for a while, but in certain areas. So we decided, okay, let's look at WealthWorks. And the beginning of WealthWorks is, let's look at this. WealthWorks says that, wealth is not just money, right? It's not just the money that we can touch. But every community has different forms of wealth, and that we can build from that. So in WealthWorks, there is 8 forms of wealth, and actually when we started, they look at these 7 forms of wealth, and when we started working with the native communities and rural communities that are non-native, said culture is also part of a form of wealth in our communities. We are building wealth around culture also. So the 8th one was added. So when we look at this, and tomorrow we have a workshop together because we're going to put this to work, how we use them in communities. So you're gonna see how we utilize these tools. Tomorrow we're gonna practice, actually. So in these 8 forms of wealth that, intellectual, individual, and social capitals, those 3 are related to people. That's the people infrastructure, right? It's like foundational. If we don't have that in a community, it's going to be harder and harder to get anything going. So it's doable still, because that's why, Mylan talk about communities of 500 population. We have communities of 800, 1,000 population. But when you have, the individual, right, the individual wealth in there, or form of capital, is people with skills and some form of education, that they will participate in sessions that we call in, and they have the interest to come and participate, right? So, and then it's social capital too, is that what's bring them together, that trust to come and do things together, because many people just decide not to participate, right? There is no social capital anymore. So those three are foundational, and that's how we know that a community is willing to work with us or not, or willing to work for themselves or not, right? That's the first thing. Then there's the natural resources that we've been talking about. Built capital is the infrastructure, the community centers, whatever community buildings do they have. Even if they're not functional, sometimes they still can be renovated. The political is that influence, right? The political capital is just as important, that the political capital is there. And financial is one of those, like we were saying, and cultural. So we go in a community and we evaluate these forms of capital. And from there, and I know that Mark talked to us this morning about find your event, right? That he was saying, one of those top 10. Find what your assets are and find what's your event. Well, we use this in order to find that. So we come into a community to look for that, and what is it? What is what he called your event? We call it, is like, what is your strongest form of capital, and we can build from that. Just let's evaluate which one is the strongest. So with that, I wanted to give you that, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow, how we evaluate that. But I want to give you some examples of some communities that we've been trying this. Now, we are given 3 years to work in a community to do this. We evaluated with other programs that it takes, like World Vision uses 10 to 15 years. Mylan talk about, 15 to 20 years too, right, to build in a community. So we are given 3 years to show results, right, in a community. So I was thinking, as how have we been successful in these 3 years, and I'll tell you the secret of that. But I'm going to give you an example of Hatch, New Mexico, and I was so glad because in lunch, did you see that? There was that one of the dressings had Hatch chilies in it. So the Hatch chilies come from this small town in New Mexico. They were actually created in partnership with the University of New Mexico, which is one of their big resources that they have close by. And so Hatch chilies are found everywhere, and it's one of those, like we've been talking. Hatch, our presenters who talk about the forestry, I was thinking and Gordon talked about this a lot, that in Hatch, the chili is grown and it's sent out. Truckloads and truckloads of chili goes out, just like you were talking about the wood. There's no value added in town. In fact, they have one festival that they do now in October, the Hatch Chili Festival, which brings about 30,000 people to town. Huge, it's huge. It's like it fills every bed and breakfast, every hotel in that southern New Mexico area, but that's it, right? So Hatch has been asking, right? We grow this chili, we export it, send it everywhere, and then we don't have anything to do the rest of the year. right? So that was one of the, so just to show you a little bit about, the population of the community, it's the total population in the 2015 census about 1,500 people. And it's been actually increasing a little bit. People under 18, you can see the population for the whole state is in the first column. And, oh no, this doesn't have the state. The next one does. The 2010 and 2015, you can see the difference in here. So it's the village of Hatch. It's growing, but it's also an aging community. That's one of the, I think this is one of the themes that we've been seeing, that the young people, they leave, right? Compared to New Mexico, the population of the community and the employment, you can see the employment compared to the whole state, 15% is pretty high unemployment, right, compared to the state at 5%. And that is because you only have a season. You have the season of growing and harvesting the chili, and then there's nothing. There's nothing in the community. So medium household income, you can see that is almost half of what it is for the state. Very similar. So I was thinking about the forestry to this example is very, very similar, right? Poverty rate, pretty high at 36% compared to the state. And then you can see that I had put in there about the health over there, the no health insurance coverage, 35% versus 16, so over, about half of what it is for the whole state. Employment patterns, the whole people who are self-employed, right? Very little self-employment. That's one of they work for the farms, basically, all the harvesting of the chili. So where we said the employment industry is agricultural, mainly, it's related to that chili crop, it's 35%. There's the wholesale and retail, huge trucks leaving with the products, right? So there's some of that. And then very little in hospitality. There's something going on a little bit now, but in construction and professional management, very little. So recreation in the community, right? When we came in and did the 8 Forms of Wealth, if we look at recreation in there, they have in the community a public library, very small public library, but all the kids end up in that place. It's really nice to see after school. And there is a senior citizen center. There is nearby, though, they have beautiful areas. Several of the there's the Gila National Forest, the lakes, there's a couple of dams, and the mountains. So they do get some of the bikers go through there, or people in the boats to go through the community. And like Mylan was saying, they are close to the interstate, but they're not right on it. That's another issue here. So the 8 Forms of Wealth, when we evaluated, they came up strong in natural, intellectual, and individual, because they have, the land. They have land in there, and they have water. They're close to the river. They have the intellectual knowledge of growing this crop, right? That they do. They have they have a strong knowledge of agriculture in that area. And they're a very tight community. So they rated themselves, we have individual capital because we come together. We know how to come together if we need to. Middle of the road was cultural and social. And then low was built, political, and financial. So once communities come through and they evaluate themselves, right, there's a couple of ways to do. They either build their economy around what's very strong, or they start working on what's very weak. It's up to them. We don't dictate that. It's like, where do you want to start? Now you know. And so Hatch decided to actually work on what's weak for them. They said, you know, we know where we are strong, but we want to work on what's very, weak. So they went in there and they started waking up their political form of capital and talked to them and said, we need you to step up. We want to build this community, and we want, a stronger political and financial, and for the village to come in and be with us on as how we build our economy. So from 2016 to 2019, that's the time that we started working with them. They then started working on the political and the financial, right? And they wanted to build entrepreneurship. They wanted to raise those numbers of, people who own businesses in our community. And so they created a venue, a location, the Hatch Mercado, for people to build, to make products of the chili. Because there is the green one and there is red, and then from there you can go and build, decorations, jellies, jams, sauces, everywhere. So then it was like, let's build a place for people to sell those, to make and go sell them. And so arts and crafts are also created through the same chilies. I don't know if you're seeing the ristras or the coronas, we call them, for Christmas, made out of red chilies. And so there was a lot of that. So there was businesses created with that. Bed and breakfasts started because they said, here bikers go by, and they, sometimes some people were telling stories to each other about tourists going by with their car broke down or the bike broke down, and they came knocking on the doors and saying, what do we do? Where is there a place to stay here? Is there a place to fix there? So then some bed and breakfasts started and expanded in the area. And then the village put some money for micro-lending. That's where they went and talked to the political capital, and then they formed an economic development committee, which they didn't have before, and then the village put in some, very little money, started with $10,000 for micro-lending for people to go and make products, the value-added products for that chili that they just export. So that's some of the successes we're seeing in there. Then I wanted to give you some other examples of some communities where I was telling you how have we been successful to do this in 3 years, right? And we evaluated the forms of capital, just like what we do. That's one of the first things we do, and we're going to do that tomorrow. But then we then figure we have to start with the strongest form of capital if we want to see results, because it takes time to build the other ones, the weak capital. So we, at the same time that the community says we want to build, the strength in where we are weak, then also we said, but we have to work together with what's strong. And so in Mora, New Mexico, this is another area. That's an area where they didn't want to have any visitors. They didn't, this community, beautiful area, but nope, we don't want to have, tourism. We don't want to have any of that in our community. So it's like we want to have Mora, for the community, right? So that was the message, and we were like, okay, so we're going to build on what's for you. So then they decided to work on building cooperatives that would help, different, they started and we were at first like overwhelmed and they were overwhelmed because they started with 6 different areas that they wanted to build cooperatives around. There's, basically around 6 forms of wealth. And we're like, you need to focus here on how we're gonna do this. So focus in Mora. But you know what? When communities are determined, right, to do this, and they do it because it was a determination. So one of the things that we found the strongest forms of wealth over there was the individual and intellectual capital. So there were people there with knowledge who have already come back to the community. And they wanted to help the community. So it was amazing because out of the local economy, 50, new businesses were created right away. It's like we're going to be doing it, and it was all around agriculture, and it was small farms, basically, very small farms looking at selling out of the community, because remember, they don't want people in the community. So they wanted to sell out. So they went to the markets in Santa Fe, and the capital of the state, and Taos, which is another tourist attraction. So they went to where the tourists are. And they said, we'll sell fresh, locally grown product to you. And we'll bring it from Mora, and we'll get it to you, and you sell it and all. You keep the tourists, but we'll do that. And they started successful. It was a win-win match, right? Because the others said, oh yeah, if we can sell, and it was from beef to tomatoes to lettuce to everything grown. Eggs became sold out in the whole region because they were. Selling eggs, locally grown eggs. So that's been another success with just the people organizing themselves in cooperatives. But the other another success here is the Spokane tribe here in Washington State. The very, very small population, First Nation. And what they decided to do is, when looking at also outside, right? It's like, okay, let's look at outside. We can create a company because there is a lot of constructions happening around them, and the tribe itself is also building a lot. Included a whole new casino, included some housing, including location for businesses. So they say, why can't we create our own company and we work for ourselves, independent from the government of the tribe? Independent. This is a private company that it was started by their housing division, and they started to be promoting themselves all around to the tribes and to outside. And then within a year, they had their first contract, big contract, and they were in operations. So that has been, a successful private business that was created out of somebody also thinking, we do have individual capital. We want people who want to work and people who want to be skilled workers, right? And so let's create a company to teach ourselves how to do it, bring experts in from the outside, but create our own jobs. Another example, this epicenter in Green River, Utah, made the news, actually, because of the way they did it. PBS did a little section on them, because what they did was something very similar that I think other communities are doing. They wanted an art community. When they did their evaluation of the 8 forms of wealth, culture came up as the one thing that they wanted to work on. So they invited artists to move to their community, and they wanted to be known as, this is a place that you can come in and be as creative as you want to be. And so they transformed themselves from this, place that was a lot of old cars thrown all over the place to clean up the spaces and show people that there's kites and trees and all that here. And so that's what they did. Enterprise, Oregon, one of the forms of capital that was strong for them was a theater. They were like, we used to love the theater. This theater, everybody knew the theater. The children used to go to the theater and all that. So rebuilding the theater became, their project. And once you rebuild the theater, think about what's next, right? People want to have a stop for ice cream or for some place to eat. So the theater itself, rebuilding, working on that theater, brought other businesses in. So that was another success that, they focus on that one project. Lewistown, Montana has, it's one of those communities very close to Ord, like Mylan talked about, and I think you know those. Their freeway, Montana is famous for their parks, right? You know the parks in Montana? Yeah? Glacier and Yellowstone, so people go to Montana for those parks, or to go hunting also. But Lewistown is nothing close to those parks. It's in the heart of Montana. It's in the very center. So at some point they did have an airport. They did have a beautiful downtown with all the stores closed. And actually they did something very similar to what Mylan talked about, Ord. This community came together, and people, and children, youth, the school, and they started working together. One of their projects that they fundraise themselves to build is this pavilion. It's a park that's going to build social capital in the community, because when we came in, it was so divided. It was very divided. People, there was people who'd say, there's nothing in this town. There's nothing here. What are we going to do? And then the other people, they're saying, we want to work in our community. We want to do something. There is something special here. And so it's like bringing all those, the groups together. We facilitated the workshops. And this is one of the projects. But it's growing and growing and growing. So I think I have one more example that I wanted to do. Is one of the new ones that we're doing. It's the town of Globe, Arizona. And Globe is a mining community, copper mines. There are 5 mines in this little community. And they are the big employers too, and they're closing. Right? They already, they're closing. And the mines are actually doing something responsible, because they are looking at how can they do value added in this community that, they're closing all the mines. So one of the mines actually is importing copper instead of mining it from the town, importing it, and created a factory, and it's creating products that they are making them in Globe and selling them out. So in order, because there was that, let's work together, let's build a win-win situation. So once we figure out in a community what the 8 forms of wealth are, then we can keep building from there. And that's what I'm hoping that we work tomorrow afternoon, and looking and evaluating that, and then how do we go about then build a project from it. So thank you very much.